continent some 18 years ago, and more like a decent widow. "I'll not waste your time, Pembroke. I'm here about Amelia." "Amelia?" Alistair repeated slowly, as if trying the word out for the first time. "My eldest daughter," she clarified, patiently playing along with Alistair's feigned ignorance. "Your sister," she didn't need to add. "And which one is she?" Alistair drummed his fingers on the desk. "The ginger one with the freckles?" All the Allenby girls were ginger-haired and freckled, having had the great misfortune to take after the late Marquess rather than their beautiful mother. Mrs. Allenby ignored his rudeness. "She's 18. I'd like for her to make a proper come-out." So she wanted money. No surprise there. "My dear lady," he said frostily, "you cannot possibly need for money. My father saw to it that you and your children were amply provided for." In fact, his father had spent the last months of his life seeing to little else, selling and mortgaging everything not nailed down, in order to keep this woman and the children he had sired on her in suitably grand style. "You're quite right, Pembroke. I don't need a farthing." She smoothed the dove-grey silk of her gown across her lap. Whether out of self-consciousness or in order to emphasize how well-lined her coffers were, Alistair could not guess. "What I hoped was that you could arrange for Amelia to be invited to a dinner or two." She smiled, as if Alistair ought to be relieved to hear this request. Even a tea or a luncheon would go a long way. Alistair was momentarily speechless. He removed his spectacles and carefully polished them on his handkerchief before tucking them into his pocket. "Surely I have mistaken you. I have no doubt that among your numerous acquaintances you could find someone willing to invite your daughter to festivities of any kind." The woman ran a monthly salon, for God's sake. She was firmly, infuriatingly located right on the fringes of decent society. Every poet and radical, not to mention every gently born person with a penchant for libertinism, visited her drawing-room. Alistair had to positively go out of his way to avoid her. "You're quite right," she replied blithely, as if insensible to the insult. "The problem is that she's had too many of those invitations. She's in a fair way to becoming a blue-stocking, not to put too fine a point on it. I hope that a few evenings spent in, more exalted company will give her mind a different turn." Had she just suggested that her own associates were too serious-minded for a young girl? It was almost laughable. But not as laughable as the idea that Alistair ought to lend his countenance to the debut of any daughter of the notorious Mrs. Allenby, regardless of whose bye-blow the child was. "My dear lady, you cannot expect—" "Goodness, Pembroke, I'm not asking for her to be presented at court, or for vouchers to Almack's. I was hoping you could prevail on one of Ned's sisters to invite her to dinner." If she were aware of what it did to Alistair to hear his father referred to thusly, she did not show it. "The old Duke of Devonshire acknowledged his mistress's child, you know. It can't reflect poorly on you or your aunts to throw my children a few crumbs." So now, after bringing his father to the brink of disgrace and ruin, she was an expert on what would or would not reflect poorly on a man, was she? The mind simply boggled. "Of course, I wouldn't expect to attend with her," she continued. He reared back in his chair. "Good God, I should think not." Only then did she evidently grasp that she was not about to prevail. "I only meant that I would engage a suitable chaperone. But I see that I've bothered you for no reason." She rose to her feet with an audible swish of costly silks. "I wish you well, Pembroke." Alistair was only warming to the topic, though. "If I were to acknowledge all my father's bastards, I'd have to start a charitable foundation. There would be opera dancers and housemaids lined up down the street." At this she turned back to face him. "You do your father an injustice. He was not a man of temperate desires, but he and I shared a life together from the moment we met until he died. I feel certain both your husband and my mother were touched to discover that the two of you had such an aptitude for domestic felicity, despite all appearances to the contrary."